Hello, my name is Apollo, and welcome to Pantheon Talks. So, you want to make a webtoon, but you don't think you need to study or do research. Well, guess what? We can all tell. If you want to learn why it's important to study when making a comic, then stay tuned. Alright, let's dive in. Why is it important to study when making a comic? The answer to that question is simple. Studying equals success. That's it. Oh, you still don't get it? Okay, that's fine. Let's break it down. So, studying in a nutshell means actively learning or gaining knowledge either from books or by examining things in the world. Now, some of us may have a warped sense of studying because, let's be honest, some educational systems really don't teach us to enjoy it. But that's a topic for another channel. In order to grow rapidly, though, you have to do it. Doesn't matter if you hate it, you just have to do it. So, have you ever seen a story get rebooted and the art drastically improved, but the story didn't change? Then you hear the artist say, I don't know why I haven't gained more of a following. I've improved the art. Well, let me tell you, improving the art is only one piece of the puzzle. You likely don't have an art problem, you have a writing problem, possibly an ego problem, but I'm not going to touch that issue. However, in all seriousness, we've got to redefine that word in our mind. Start looking at studying as something that's essential, that's something that's going to be positive to our growth. In order to do something well, and let me shout this to all those in the back, you must study. You have to do research. And in a lot of areas, learning by doing is the best way to learn. But in many cases, we have to think realistically. We're limited by our time and our resources. Now, you definitely can dive right in and start making your comic with no plan and not having studied anything, and it could be completely successful. So, I say do what makes sense to you. However, I personally think it's wiser to learn by reading and studying the things that we want to do before diving in. Now, specifically for Webtoon creators, I base this opinion on things that I've observed and people that I've talked to. People who just dive right in. They've told me that they always think in hindsight if they had studied, some of the issues in the beginning of their comic wouldn't be as bad. And listen, we're not getting any younger. Well, maybe I'm self-projecting here, but making a comic, it takes a lot of hard work. Do you want to feel like you wasted a bunch of time? No? Great. I didn't think so. So you've got to make those punches count. Now, I'm saying you're not necessarily going to create a masterpiece when you produce your first comic. Well, let me take that back. You might, but probably not. To be honest, we all have to acquire a certain level of OJT, which is on-the-job training. So this will come into play when we're creating our first comic or second comic. There are just things that we won't master until we do it, no matter how much we study. Now, I know some of you are probably thinking, well, I can't find any articles. What is this? 1367? Do we need to send messenger birds to communicate information between each other nowadays? No? Okay, I didn't think so. Have you looked around? Webtoons, the actual company that we're all wanting to post on or are posting on, they have, let's call them official tutorials on improving or making a webtoon, but we'll come back to that later in the video. Now, I understand Most of us want a one all-stop place for reliable sources that go into elaborate detail and really just break down the methods for creating a successful webtoon. But let me bring you all in on a little secret. Art and writing is subjective. Why do you think there are so many different methods? We all have to find articles and methods that work for us. So that means you're going to have to do research. You're going to have to find your own resources and things that make sense for you. Now, for me personally, I'll give you how I track down my sources. The first thing I do when I look at a source or an article or a video is I think about where it came from. And then I think, is this a credible source? Meaning, are they a published Webtoon Originals creator? A published writer, a professional editor? You get the idea. And if so, that's great. You know you've got a good source. Now, this isn't saying that other sources that don't have credentials can't produce good content for you to consume. Wow, I kind of feel like I just attacked myself with my own words. Please give us a chance. Anyway, I take on the approach that I can learn from almost anything. Even some articles that aren't my taste will have little bitty tiny gems in there that I can find useful. So basically, just become an avid reader. But here's the key point. We want to acquire useful knowledge and information. Don't fill up on junk. You want to look for points that will really benefit you. So the answer is simple. Studying equals success. So now that I've sold you on the concept of studying, let's dig even deeper. Now there are 3 factors that I think really go into what you should study specifically. And basically you're going to just ask yourself 3 questions. 1, how can I structure my story? 2, what genre is my story? And 3, what art skills do I need to learn? Now we're going to break down each one of these. So we're going to start with how can I structure a story? As you begin to study story structure, you start to learn so many different writing elements, different writing techniques, literary devices, and it can be a little overwhelming. The structure is extremely important, and especially in fiction, it's necessary. And it's for 2 very specific reasons: logic and understanding. Now let's look at the first point. It's logical to the story. Now this is pretty simple. When a story makes sense and it's easy to follow, then you produce happy readers. And especially if our story is complicated, it really needs to make sense. It needs to be linear. We want to create a spider web, not a random ball of yarn. We are weaving out multiple story threads delicately, elegantly, and it's all connecting in this beautiful web. A strong story structure should make everything come together in a harmony, and it'll make sense not only to you, but also to the audience. Let's look at our second point now that we've made it to the audience. The audience needs to understand. Yet another simple concept, however, this seems to be a huge downfall of a number of authors. Listen. If I pick up a story to read, and if I'm confused by the end of the first episode, I'm just going to be 100% honest, I'm probably not coming back to read anymore. Now, if our audience is confused by the end of the first episode, then we need to go back and rework the story. Our readers need structure. For the love of all good things in the world, please give them this basic need. That way they can understand the story as it's unraveling itself before them. And you'll know when your audience understands. When they start theory crafting in the comments, you'll look there and you'll see them guessing things that are later to come, or even things that aren't in the realm of possibilities for your story. But that will be a key indicator to let you know that to a reasonable degree, the story makes enough sense for those expressions to be formed in the comments. We want to evoke, an emotion or a feeling, something, anything from the reader in order to ensnare them into the world of our story. But in order to do this, it's gotta make sense. It has to follow some form of structure. Now, you definitely can wing it. However, there are a lot of useful tools in structuring a great story. Now, this can get extremely complicated, and hopefully in future videos, we'll really break down some of the basic story structure samples. You need to have a good beginning, middle, and ending. And I know what you're thinking. That's probably the most obvious answer you can have. And I know how to do it. Let's play a game. Can you sum up the beginning section of your story in 1 to 2 sentences? I'll give you a minute. No? Okay, what about the middle? 1 to 2 sentences? No? The end? Wait, you don't even know what's happening in the end? Now, okay, I'm not trying to, say you need to have everything worked out. But what I'm saying is, regardless if you're a detailed outliner or a pantser, you need to have an idea of where the story is going. And just because you write something down in the beginning of your story, it doesn't mean you can't change that later. But having a general idea of where the story is going in the beginning, the middle, and the ending will only serve to support the story. So let's start with the beginning. We need to ask ourselves, where does the story actually begin? And no, I'm not talking about the opening line, your character's backstory, or the history of the world. Specifically, I'm talking about what is the situation where your main character's life was changed forever. Now, this is your inciting incident. So wherever this takes place in the story, that's what I'm referring to. This is where the story really begins. Now, a side note, if you want to know more about inciting incidents, just leave a comment below. We have that video coming soon when we get to tackle plot. All right, next, let's look at the middle. What's the middle supposed to look like? The middle needs to be constantly building on the inciting incident. But not only that, it's going to create a number of obstacles to keep your MC from obtaining their goal until we reach the climax. So, see, working towards a goal again. Now, finally, the end. How are we going to craft a really impactful ending? Okay, to just make this part wow everyone, the climax of the season of the story, it needs to be everything. The most intense, the most thrilling, the most exciting. We want our audience on the edge of their seat. Now imagine if you were reading a story and let's say it was about like a hero, a princess, and an evil villain. The villain kidnaps the princess. The hero goes through a number of obstacles to make his way to fight the villain or whatever. He finally gets there at the climax. It's going to be this epic showdown because this villain is like the 1 million tier magician of this world, and he's like brought whole nations to their knees and whatnot. And then the hero gets there and the villain's like, oh, here, you can have the princess. I just wanted to play a chess match with her. Okay, this was not what you set up. Your promise in the beginning of the story, we're weaving that out into something logical. So in order to make the ending impactful, whatever we've set up in the beginning, we want our readers to know it's going to be worth the wait. See, the reader is trusting us to guide them to something spectacular, but also logical. Now, on the screen here are going to be a few examples of how to structure a story. And these examples, you can look them up. They have guidelines. Hopefully we can get into them in the future. But two that really stand out to me, I love the snowflake method. You can look that up. It's really cool structure. It makes sense to me how it's formulated. I also enjoy the 3-act structure and the hero's journey. Each one of those I hear about relatively often, and they seem to be the structures that are more popular. However, I included some other ones just so that, if those don't resonate with you, if you've heard them before, you can look into these other structures that could possibly help you to really craft your story and take it to the next level. In order to have a really impactful story, we've got to research story structure. We've got to make sure that what we're creating makes sense and the audience will understand it. So let's hit our second point. What genre is my story? Now, genre can get a little complicated, but I promise, knowing your genre really pays off. However, there are a few issues when it comes to genre on Webtoons. One, some very specific genres are missing. Two, I think because these genres are missing, some creators have decided to get a little creative with their assignments of their Webtoons genre. So what I'm just going to say to that is, if you're stretching the boundaries, just be smart about this. Now, as an author, genre really controls what you write and how you write it. It describes the style and the focus of the story of the webtoon that we're writing. So think about genres like sort of a blueprint. It's a basis for the story. Why does genre matter? Because this literary element fulfills the reader's expectations, point blank, period. Like, the reader goes into a genre having a certain level of expectations. See, the understanding of the genre type, it makes life easier for the reader. Some readers, they might even give your story more of a chance if it's in a genre that they like. So a genre sets an automatic expectation in the reader's mind before they even read page 1. Now, some of us, talking about the audience here, have particularly deep connections to certain genres. And it's our job as writers to fulfill those expectations. Think about it. We may watch or read a certain story simply because we've enjoyed similar stories to that in the past. If you're going to go to the movies and you want to see, let's say, an action movie, what do you expect to see? You expect to see cool fight scenes, maybe some explosions. If you're going to see a romance movie, probably hot people and kissing. Like, there are just certain expectations in stories. Now, for me, if a story is mislabeled and I was not in the mood to read or listen or watch that story, then I'm probably just done. I'll probably turn off my tablet and start watching Netflix or something. It's basically a whole mood. Anyway, the moral of the story, don't falsify your genre. It will only hurt you in the end. So be wise about the genre you pick and make sure you set proper expectations and fulfill the minimal expectations of your story's particular genre. Basically, this is going to involve you doing a little bit of research, not only understanding the literary meaning, but also the webtoon meaning. Now, on Webtoons, sometimes the genre isn't straightforward. As we discussed, some particular genres are missing. We've got to get creative with our research. Look at the stories that are popular in the genre you're posting in and ask yourself, does my story fit with these other stories? Now, again, that's going to involve you doing personal research. You might have your story classified as one thing, but it would benefit to be in another genre because overall, the story you're creating fits that genre more so. Now, let's look at point 3. What art skills do I need to learn? Now, this is also another hard topic which we could spend a long time covering. However, I'm going to condense it for this video. Basically, it's something that we as amateur artists just need to discuss and we need to face. Our art is not perfect, but that doesn't mean it's bad. Some of us may be on the edge of greatness, and with just a little bit more practice, maybe some more tweaks, we're there. However, some of us may be extremely lacking, but you're trying your best. So whether you're the former or the latter, understand that we're all in the same boat. We're all in the boat of improvement. Even pro artists, when I read articles about them, they talk about how they're attempting to improve their skills. So we need to be realistic. You need to do an honest self-examination of your own skills. Now, linked in the description is a really amazing article I found from a professional comic artist entitled 11 Tips for Improving Your Skills at Drawing. Now, under tip 11, he makes this point. Having an attention and focus is so much more powerful than simply drawing whatever pops into your melon. It allows you to maximize your efforts. You will learn much faster by doing this and not get burned out so quickly by spending time on the wrong aspects of your work. So figure out your weak points and work on those. A few areas that I'm personally considering right now, I'm looking at anatomy, I'm looking at perspective and composition. It really depends on what do you think you need to improve in. We have to keep practicing. Regardless if we've reached a certain level, practice will only serve to elevate the level of our art. Remember, comics are a visual medium, which means that the art is the most important factor. Now that we've reached our last segment, the part I told you we would come back to, what tools are free to take advantage of before writing or illustrating our comic? So here are 6 areas that we can take advantage of. Webtoons, interviews, books, YouTube, friends and family, and fellow artists. Now, I'm going to break down all of these again in a condensed form. So Webtoons, you really take advantage of all of the official resources that come from Webtoon headquarters. These are really meant to help you. I think Webtoons, from what I've observed, wants creators to succeed. Also, reading Webtoons with a critical eye in general can be really helpful. Studying the paneling, studying the lettering, the bubble placement, the character actions, the composition, the perspective. Really absorb yourself into those things as you're reading so that you can learn from them. When you read a Webtoon and the story just flows effortlessly, look back at the chapter and try to figure out what made this episode so much easier to read. That will really serve to benefit us in improving our skills. And it's another form of research that can be fun. So interviews. Hearing from professionals in the field can be extremely beneficial. Learn from their knowledge and experience, but keep in mind this is a subjective process. You'll find that often artists have similar but different methods for creating, and depending on who is speaking, what they say, the methods they use, it may resonate with our personal creative process and make things that may seem hard easier to understand. Now, books. This can be a little tricky because from what I've researched, I have not come across any particular books made for Webtoons specifically. However, there are methods we can apply from writing and comic making books. I've linked a few in the description below, so if you want to check those out, you definitely can. Now, YouTube. This is a great resource as you can do this passively. You can simply just listen to someone chat on a topic you're interested in, and that can be extremely useful. There are a lot of great content creators on here. However, I always encourage you to take things with a grain of salt, including anything that we say here. So this is another source that's free that you can get a lot of insight into. Now, friends and family. This is probably one of the ones that can be the most awkward, but these individuals can still provide a point of view on what you create. It may not be the viewpoint you want, but it can still be valuable. And I'm going to break this down for a second. In order to extract the most from your friends and family, you have to prepare well. Let me explain. You need to tell them exactly what you're doing and ask specific questions like, was the storyline clear? Were there any drawings or panels that were unclear? Did any of the characters stand out to you? If so, why? At what point did the story lose your interest? With some well-placed questions, you can figure out a basis for what you're doing. Like, was the storyline clear? For example, that is very useful to know. If your story makes sense, that goes back to our point earlier with story structure. Is it logical? And then it goes back to the other point of, does the audience understand? So if you get an answer like that from your 90-year-old grandfather and he says, yeah, I understood it, it was boring though, at least you're on the right track. So depending on your story, pick questions that will help support what you're trying to do. Now, fellow artists, this is one of the greatest resources you can have. Don't underestimate the power of learning and forming close relationships with individuals who will not only support you, but they'll give you honest feedback. Like, every once in a while, you need to be told that your stuff sucks in order to keep progressing. And I'm not limiting this to only Webtoon artists, but study from all types of artists. Writers, illustrators, traditional comic makers, graphic designers, marketers, whatever areas you may need help in, look at how those artists are crafting their works and really try to learn from them. And possibly, if you can, you get an opportunity to become friends with one of them. That insight will only serve to benefit your story. So wow, we covered a lot of stuff in this video, and if you made it to this point, thank you so much for listening. Be sure to check out the links in the description below. I took a lot of effort to comb through different sources to help all of us. Now next week, I have a special treat for you all. We will be discussing understanding the common Webtoon viewer. And so I think we all have a little bit of a misconception. We think that maybe there's only one type of viewer on Webtoons, but hopefully next week's video will really open our eyes to expand what we are doing and help us to really market ourselves correctly to the right audience. So we will focus on a few things readers look at before and during the reading process. Now, if you enjoyed this video, please subscribe, leave us a like, a comment, and most definitely ring the bell. Be sure to follow us on all of our social media accounts, link in the description below. We are particularly active on Instagram, so if you want to chat with us, feel free to pop on by. All right, I'll catch you in our next video. Apollo out.